All right, it's time to start talking about the draft. It's time to start looking at the positional groups that we could see the Mariners target. I'm going to start with college pitching real quick. I want to thank everybody for their subscription. It means a ton. I would appreciate that you keep this information somewhat between us. I don't really care if you target it too much because I'm not going to tell you, hey, I know the Mariners are taking this guy. I know the Mariners are interested in this. I'm not going to give you that stuff. You know why? I don't know. I am not connected to the draft right now, other than the fact that I study the heck out of it. It's still kind of my baby, even though I don't do it professionally very much. And talk to agents, get a chance to watch a lot of tape. So we're going to talk about it like that, and also we'll do a chat on next Tuesday. Oh, we'll do a live one because it's a home game. So I think, yeah, that'll be fun. That'll be fun. All right, college pitching is the first one. And, this is an area the Mariners haven't really targeted all that much early on. You think of the Dipoto drafts and you think about college arms, and that totally makes sense because Logan Gilbert and George Kirby and Bryce Miller, Brian Wu, they've certainly done well in that regard. All those guys drafted relatively recently by the Seattle Mariners, all a big part of their success. I think this could be a year where you see the Mariners start to target some college pitching. And I'll give you 3 names that I think that they could take at pick 15. And I'll give you 5 names that I think they could take at 55. I would normally do 5 for each one, and I will do that going forward. Actually, the high school arm, maybe I'm only going to give you 1 or 2, but I'll talk about some guys I think, a bunch of guys who could make sense at 55. Anyway, this is a long-winded way of me saying that this is not a great college pitching class. Now, I will also say this. I'm giving you 3 realistic targets. If Hagen Smith from Arkansas or Chase Burns from Wake Forest was to make their way down somehow to 15, yeah, I think Seattle would absolutely take them. It's very hard for me to see those guys getting outside the top 10, much less get to 15. I'll give you 3 guys that I think could make sense at 15. And let's start with Trey Yesavich. He's a pitcher for East Carolina, not exactly known as a baseball power, but has produced an awful lot of talented players. Gavin Williams recently. You're watching Jeff Hoffman become a huge part of their bullpen. So they have produced quite a bit of stuff. One of my very first scouting trips, actually, to East Carolina. But enough about that. A guy who went 11-1 this year, if you're into that sort of thing. A 2.03 ERA, you should definitely be into that sort of thing. 93 and a third innings, 145 strikeouts against 32 walks, only 4 homers allowed. Yesavich is a guy who he's only 20. He'll turn 21 at the end of July. So there is a lot of upside still left in this arm. He is a little unique that way. I'll actually mention another arm who's kind of unique in that way as well. A guy who was pitching behind Gavin Williams and now one of the best college arms in baseball, 6'4", 230 pounds. Fastball will get around 98, which used to be plus, but now is more plus. Doesn't have a ton of life to it, but I do think that there is enough that he can call that pitch plus. Curveball, only so, but he has a really good slider. I get plus grades from scouts that I talk to, and his splitter is an above average pitch as well. So he has 3 pitches that are going to be above average to plus if everything goes right. He throws those pitches for strikes. Command still has a little bit of work to do, but that's true for a lot of 20-year-olds. There's true for a lot of 30-year-olds, of course, too. But there is enough upside here, and he repeats his delivery well enough that I think he's going to throw enough strikes to be a competent mid-rotation arm. And there's some upside that suggests he could be a little bit better than that as well, which is one of the reasons why he may not be there at 15. Right now, if I was forced, if you put some sort of weapon to my head and say who the Seattle Mariners are taking at pick 15, I would say it's this guy. Keep that between us, please and thank you. You'll see mocks and stuff. I'm sure that'll link them too. And part of it is it just makes sense for them to start attacking college pitching again because they've been so heavy on high school bats in the early rounds in the last few years. But I really like Yesavich. There is some health stuff going on here. Something to keep an eye on. He ended up coming back. He's participating in the MLB Draft Combine. But it is something, the medicals are going to have to check out. That's true for any pitcher. That's true for any position player, but it's especially true for pitchers. But yeah, Trey Yesovich, if I could have any college arm outside of Smith and Burns, this would be the guy. And I think he makes a lot of sense at 15. Okay, the next pitcher on my list is Brody Brett, a right-handed pitcher out of the University of Iowa. In 2024, he had a 3.33 ERA over 15 appearances, all of them starts, 78 and a third innings, did walk 49, but also struck out 128. In terms of just pure upside in an arm, I don't think you're going to find one anywhere even close to Brett. And that is high praise because I do like Hagen Smith. I do like Chase Burns. But just upside wise, I think Brett beats them because you're talking about a guy who might have an 80 fastball and 70 slider. And, you take a look at those numbers. It's worth pointing out, too, that ERA is a smidgen misleading. He was dominant at times. He went through a little bit of a rough patch, which is a little bit of concern. You'd like to see just pure dominance. But for a pitcher who I think turns 22 at the end of September, September 27th, 2022, there's plenty of time for him to figure some stuff out. Like I said, fastball is electric. Slider is absolutely filthy. It's worth pointing out that he used his slider more than his fastball, which, is good and bad. I think it's mostly good because the Mariners love those type of profiles. It also hurt his fastball command. A bunch of people brought that up for me. Really good athlete. Played wide receiver, I want to believe, in college, or was set to play wide receiver in college. Didn't play a whole lot of football, I believe, at Iowa, but that tells you the athleticism that this guy has. Control needs a lot of work, and that's true for a lot of play. Again, I almost did the whole, it's hard to not be repetitive with some of this stuff. Young athlete, two-way athlete who is basically new to committing to baseball, right? Command's going to be an issue. So this is not the fast track college arm, right? This is a guy who's probably going to need a couple years in the minors, unless you move him to relief. And a lot of people think that's the path. I would give him every chance to start and then move him to relief, knowing what you have in that fastball slider combination. He also throws a splitter, fringe average. So we're talking about 45 plus. Yes, that's a real grade. I'm sorry to the people who don't believe in that. Solid average is a grade too. You're not interested in that stuff. You're just interested in the players who have a chance to help the Seattle Mariners. But Brody Brett's really interesting, and I've seen him mentioned a lot in the 17 to 22 range. But I could see Seattle maybe targeting some upside here. And like I said, of any pitcher in the class, this is the guy who has the highest upside. He comes with considerable risk. I mean, this is a guy who walked 61 batters in his junior year. He posted a whip that year of 1.273. A 1.213 isn't very good either. Nearly 6 walks an inning, but nearly 15 strikeouts as well. So you got to take the bitter and the better a little bit there. I would bet on the upside, and I would not hate seeing Brody Brett as a Seattle Mariner whatsoever. Okay, here's a really fun one, and I think it would be a slight reach, but I would also be very intrigued with picking up a talent like this. Not an easy name to pronounce. Jurrangelo Cijntje. That's spelled Jurrangelo You better believe I've looked up how to pronounce it a few times. So on top of that fun name, here's another fun thing about him. He's a switch pitcher. He throws with his right and he throws with his left. Much better with his right, and we'll talk about that. I just want to give you the stats real quick. 16 appearances, a 3.67 ERA, 90 and 2/3 innings, 30 walks, 113 strikeouts, did allow 11 homers, which gives you some idea that the command has a little bit of work here. But there are some things that I think you can like about Jurrangelo Cijntje. Boy, Cijntje, it's such a tough name. I love it, but it's such a So this is a player who just turned 21 at the end of May. Draft eligible sophomore, was I believe an 18th round pick in 2022, 18th, 19th, something along those lines. Please don't Please don't turn the video off because I couldn't get that name right. It's an interesting profile as a switch pitcher. However, I think there is much more upside, and I would not be shocked if whatever team drafts him says, let's give the left-handed thing up, because he doesn't throw particularly hard with his left hand. He does have a well above average slider. And so, maybe if you are a guy who's facing a player who really struggles against lefties, hey, maybe you're facing Dominic Canzone or Luke Raley at the next level. Sorry to call out a couple of Mariners. Maybe you are using him in that frame. I like him a lot better as a right-handed pitcher. Plus fastball, plus slider. Change, I think, can be an above-average pitch as well. Still developing his command. He's a really good athlete, switch hitter. Only question mark I have is he's listed at 5'11", and I wouldn't be surprised if 5'11 is actually 5'10 or 5'9. That's usually how those things work. But I think there's a ton of upside in his right-handed arm. I do not think we've seen anywhere close to the best from him. And that's kind of what's interesting about all three of these guys, is that they aren't your prototypical boring lefty, who has 3 above average pitches, probably isn't going to be anything more than a back end starter. There's a chance for them to end up being back end starters, of course. But there's also the upside to be a lot more than that. You don't see that typically with college arms. So while I think it would be probably a little bit of a reach in terms of where he's valued, he's probably closer to a top 35 prospect on my board. But that's not a huge reach. And I can understand, because of his upside, it wouldn't shock me if Seattle targeted him at all. Notice that I didn't say his name, the rest of his profile, because it's just too hard. Jurrangelo. It's hard. Jurrangelo. Let's talk about some arms that they could target in the second round. So on top of having the 15th pick, the Mariners, of course, have the 55th pick. And I would guess that they don't go pitcher, or at least college arm. But if they take a high school bat, if they took even a college bat, it wouldn't shock me if they went the college route. Heck, even if there is one of the rare high school pitchers, just a spoiler alert here, this is not a good high school pitching class, but maybe a couple of guys who could fall there. Let's talk about college arms, though. One of the guys I think makes a ton of sense. He may go a little earlier than this, but Jonathan Santucci, a left-hander out of Duke, ERA of 3.41 in 13 starts and 58 innings, 90 to 36 strikeout to walk ratio, allowed 4 home runs. It's worth pointing out that Santucci is fairly new to full-time pitching, was kind of a two-way player at the University of Duke, which I think I already mentioned. Was a really good prospect coming out of the draft out of Massachusetts, but ended up going the college route and dealt with some elbow stuff, but he looks like he's going to be fully healthy now. Above average fastball. There's still a little bit of projection left in the arm at 6'2", 205. Works mostly 93 to 95, occasionally gets 96 to 97. Slider is already a plus pitch. 2-plane break, which you love to see. Can locate it for strikes when he's operating at his best. He also has above average changeup, and that could actually end up being his best pitch. Same fastball arm path, same arm path as his fastball, but still offers some late fade. Like that pitch quite a bit. Command still has work to go. It's going to be true for every pitcher that we mentioned. It'd be weird if it didn't. Maybe George Kirby is the only exception to that, really, as a college pitcher. Maybe Paul Skeens, too, to be honest with you. But Santucci is not the boring lefty that we were just describing, but he is someone, I think, who can be a solid mid-rotation arm, back-end type of floor, which is one of the reasons why I think he probably goes a little earlier. But if he was to fall to 55, I think he would be really nice value for Seattle, and it's certainly not crazy to think that he falls to that range. Next up on my list is Drew Beam, a pitcher that if you happen to watch him pitch in the College World Series recently, you can probably understand why he's on my list. He was absolutely outstanding against a very good North Carolina lineup. Shutout. Tough to do better than that. He did have actually kind of a mixed season, though. 18 appearances, 98 innings pitched, 98 and a third innings pitched so far, 92 strikeouts, only 25 walks. Did give up 14 homers, and some of that has to do with playing in a loaded SEC and some unfriendly ballparks, but Control ahead of command, but control is really good. He throws everything for strikes. Best pitch is a changeup. It's got some tumbling action on it. He will throw a cutter and a curveball. Cutter is kind of slider like. It's got some work to be done, but Seattle's done a really good job in turning those cutter sliders into really good slide pieces. Curveball's an average pitch as well. Operates mostly 92, 94, can get it up to 98 if he is working in short term stuff. And I would imagine Seattle tries to get the most of the velocity because why wouldn't you? You know, the stuff wise here, we're just talking about a back end type, but he kind of reminds me a little bit out of college of Brian Wu. And Seattle's done a really good job with these type of arms. Now, he doesn't generate the type of spin Brian Wu does because very few do. I just think Seattle with this type of profile is an organization I trust to get the absolute best out of him. 55 actually might be a slight reach for him. I would take that chance, especially if they go high ceiling with pick 15. I would take the chance of a high floor arm in Drew Beam. And you know what? There might be more upside than suggested here too. Why not? Third pitcher on the list for potential picks at 55 is Luke Holman. I do not believe he's related to Brian Holman, former Mariner legend, and a guy who got the first 26 outs of a start before giving up a homer to Ken Phelps. It breaks my heart thinking of it, even though I didn't even see a pitch. Transferred to Louisiana State from Alabama and put up solid numbers this year. 16 appearances, all of them starts. 2.75 ERA, 91 and 2/3 innings, 127 strikeouts against 33 walks. That's been one of the better strikeout to walk ratios of the pitchers that we've talked about so far. It's not Kirby-esque, but it's pretty darn good. His fastball has actually been down a little bit this year, but he's a 21-year-old. He just turned 21 in January, so some upside left in that arm. He can get it up to 96, 97. He was more 91 to 94, which is a smidgen concerning, but maybe that's one of the reasons why he can actually fall to Seattle at this point. Looked like a guy who was going to go much higher prior to the start of the season, but, you know, things happen. Things definitely happen. Plus slider, solid average curveball, you know, inconsistent with that pitch as, you know, again, we've talked about it a bunch. Changeup needs some work, but it can be a solid fourth pitch for him. And he throws all those pitches for strikes. He repeats his delivery really, really well. So I think the command has a chance to actually be plus here. And that's tough to say. Plus command is actually really hard to reach. Above average, average, not so much. But plus, that is a difficult mark to reach. I like his arm. I like this arm a lot. I think he would make an excellent addition at 55. And I think they need to target these type of arms. You know, it's fine to have the upside guys that they have, but they've graduated most of those guys. They need to start replenishing the farm system. An arm like Luke Holman would go a long way towards doing that, especially at just pick 55. We'll stick in the SEC and we'll do another arm that I think a lot of people thought was going to be in that first round mix. I don't think he's in that mix at all now, but it's Bryce Cunningham, a right-hander out of Vanderbilt, B-U-I-L-T. Vanderbilt they've built quite the program. Terrible pun. Please don't tell anyone. ERA of 4.36 over 16 starts and 84 and 2/3 innings, 34 walks, 14 homers allowed, and 96 strikeouts. Cunningham, like I said, I think was a guy that a lot of people thought was going to go quite a bit high. Or I guess I should say actually will, right? Because the draft hasn't happened yet. But the inconsistent results. He has that prototypical frame, 6'5", 230 pounds. Fastball gets into the high 90s without a whole lot of effort. Change is actually maybe his best pitch. It's like I saw on MLB.com when I was putting together the birthdays and stuff like that for this list, that they called it a Cambayo. You know, we're familiar with that pitch with Felix Hernandez, of course. It has that kind of high 80s, low 90s offering to it that can give hitters a lot of trouble. If you want to call it a splinker, that's fine too, but it is a off-speed pitch that I think can give hitters a lot of trouble. He also throws a slider. I imagine Seattle will work hard on developing that offering into a better one if they were to draft him. And command is just okay, needs a little bit of work. You're hoping that you get the upside version of him. Really good in the Cape Cod League, one of the better arms. And I think that probably was one of the reasons why people had him a lot higher coming into the year. But I think he'd be solid value at 55. And I'd be really curious if he can't work out as a starter, what that fastball change could do as a reliever. It sounds easy enough. Doesn't always work out like that. But the stuff suggests that he would be really good in that role. But he might be a really good starter too. And one other name for you, and this one will be controversial, is definitely not the right word, but not necessarily considered a top 60 prospect, which is what you would be hoping to get, I guess, with the 55th pick, excuse me. But I really like Gage Zeal. He's a right-hander out of the University of Miami, Florida, not Ohio, although Miami, Ohio's produced some good players as well. ERA of 3.87 this year in 15 appearances, exactly 100 innings, 89 to 28 strikeout to walk ratio with 11 homers allowed. Started in relief and then made his way into being the starter. He doesn't have electric stuff. The slider is the thing that I think is the most interesting. It's cutter-like, mid to high 80s, bears into the hands of left-handed hitters. Whenever I say that, by the way, I always want to get those hands up there as a left-handed hitter myself. A bad one, but a left-handed hitter myself. Fastball's 93 to 96, solid average. Change has made progress. Throws everything for strikes, which is nice to see as well. This would be the type of arm you take if you go really high upside with pick 15, right? Like a guy who's going to be over slot. So you don't reach per se, but this would be your Ben Williamson type of pick, your Tyler Locklear type of pick, that type of guy that, has put up good numbers, played in a solid conference. I like Gage Zeal. He'd make more sense in the third round for sure. But I think that he has enough upside and certainly a high enough floor that I think he could help your staff. And I wouldn't hate to see something like that at all at pick 55. That's going to do it. If you have questions, please DM me or email me because I really want to kind of keep this between us a little bit. I understand, you can mention, hey, I really like one of the guys you mentioned or something like that. Or if you want to mention pretty much anything but the thing I said about Yesevich, which, look, that's based on third-party information. The Seattle Mariners have not come out and told me, hey, Chris, we're taking this player. They never would. It would be stupid to do so, especially a month before the draft. But yeah, tell me what you think. I'll be back in a couple of days. I'll probably post it on Monday. I'll do the high school arms that I think could make sense more for 55 than would for 15. But yeah, tell me what you think. And again, just really appreciate your guys' support.